Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You know we like to get into the details, and today is no exception as we're taking a closer look at a fascinating aspect of autism, hyposensitivity.
Yeah, hyposensitivity. Because when we think about sensory experiences with autism, it's often about things being, too much, too intense.
Right.
But hyposensitivity kind of flips the script, right? It's about sensory input being dialed down, turned way low. And to help us unpack all of this, we're diving into a really insightful blog post called Understanding Autism and Hyposensitivity, Navigating Sensory Challenges.
Great post.
So before we get into the specifics, can you give us the lay of the land here? What exactly is hyposensitivity?
Well, at its core, hyposensitivity is basically just having a reduced sensitivity to sensory input.
Reduced sensitivity.
Means you need more of a certain stimulus to really feel it, to really process it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not just talking about like someone who likes their music loud or their food spicy. It's more profound than that.
Yeah.
It's about how the brain actually receives and processes those sensory signals.
So how common is this? Are we talking about a small subset of the autistic population, or is this something that comes up more often than people realize?
Oh, it's a lot more common than many people think.
Mm.
Studies have actually shown that sensory processing differences, in some form or another, are present in a whopping 70 to 90% of autistic individuals.
Wow, 70 to 90%. That is a huge chunk of the autistic population.
Yeah, it's significant. And hyposensitivity is a big part of that.
Okay, so we're talking about a majority of autistic individuals experiencing some kind of difference in the way their senses are working. So if these sensory signals are basically being turned down, how does that actually manifest across different senses? Because we've got tactile, auditory, visual. What are some of the telltale signs?
Well, let's start with touch, right? Someone with tactile hyposensitivity might not even flinch if you brush up against them. They might have a really, really high pain tolerance, or they might just crave a lot of deep pressure, like squeezing into tight spots or always wanting hugs.
Ah.
Then you've got auditory hyposensitivity. This can look like someone who seems totally oblivious to loud noises that make everyone else jump. Or maybe they have a really hard time filtering out background noise, making it tough to focus on a single conversation when there's a lot going on around them.
Oh, I can see how that would be a challenge. So it's almost like their internal volume knob is stuck on low, so to speak.
Yeah, you could say that.
And I imagine that could easily be misconstrued, right?
Oh, definitely.
Like someone might think they're being rude or ignoring them, when in reality, they're just not processing the sound at the same level.
Exactly. And then there's the visual sense. Someone with visual hyposensitivity, they might miss those really subtle shifts in facial expressions or not pick up on body language cues.
And those are so key in social interactions.
Yeah, absolutely. They're crucial. And missing those cues can make navigating social situations incredibly tricky.
It makes you wonder about the social impact of all this because we rely so heavily on those nonverbal cues, a raised eyebrow, a slight change in tone. I mean, if you're not picking up on those things, it must make social interaction incredibly challenging.
It can be. It really can. Imagine trying to follow a conversation where you're constantly missing those subtle social signals. It can be incredibly frustrating and even isolating.
Absolutely. And I imagine this could be especially tough for kids who are, already trying to figure out this whole social world thing. And then you add in this layer of sensory difference that can make it hard to connect with their peers.
Oh, for sure. It's something to be very mindful of, especially since hyposensitivity can often fly under the radar.
Yeah.
It's not always as obvious as some other sensory processing differences. It's easy to misinterpret those signs.
Right.
See, a kid who's always bumping into things seems fearless. You might think, oh, they're clumsy or impulsive.
Yeah.
But they could just be craving those really intense sensory experiences.
Like their brain needs that extra jolt just to kind of make sense of things.
Exactly.
And that makes me think about how easy it would be to misinterpret hyposensitivity, especially in kids. We touched on it earlier, but what are some of the common misconceptions or misinterpretations that you've come across?
Well, you might see a child who's constantly fidgeting, touching everything in sight, and you might think, oh, that's ADHD, or they're just hyperactive.
Right.
But they could just be craving that tactile input.
They need it.
Or think about the kid who always seems to be hungry, wants seconds, thirds, even when they're full.
Oh, yeah.
It's easy to see that as a lack of self-control, but it could just be hyposensitivity to taste, so they need to really pile on those flavors to actually feel satisfied.
It's like they're trying to fill in these sensory gaps.
Yes.
Which I imagine can be exhausting for everyone involved. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about support, because the blog post that we've been referencing mentions sensory diets, and knowing you, I'm guessing this isn't about cutting out sugar.
You know me too well. No, it's not about restriction at all. It's more about giving the brain what it needs. So it's about creating a routine filled with activities that provide those specific types of input that someone's brain craves.
So it's not just about more stimulation, it's about the right kind of stimulation tailored to what that individual needs.
Exactly.
So what might that actually look like in practice? Can you give us some concrete examples?
Sure. So for someone with tactile hyposensitivity, that might look like incorporating things like deep pressure massage, weighted blankets, or even just giving them plenty of opportunities for roughhousing and tumble play.
Oh, interesting.
For auditory hyposensitivity, it could involve listening to music with really strong rhythms, maybe using noise-canceling headphones in overwhelming environments, or even playing a musical instrument.
So it's about finding ways to really amplify those senses that are turned down a bit.
Yes, exactly.
What about for visual hyposensitivity? How do you create a sensory diet for that?
For visual, you want to think about incorporating a lot of contrast, bold colors, clear patterns, things that really pop visually. Using visual timers and schedules can be really helpful as well.
Wow, fascinating how these small adjustments can make such a big difference. Now, you mentioned occupational therapy earlier. How does that fit into the picture when it comes to supporting someone with hyposensitivity?
Occupational therapy can be absolutely essential. OTs are kind of like sensory detectives. They can really help us understand an individual's unique sensory profile.
I like that, sensory detectives.
And then they help you develop strategies to address those specific needs.
So it's about more than just managing symptoms. It's about empowering individuals to understand and advocate for their own sensory needs.
Absolutely. It's about giving them the tools to navigate their world in a way that feels comfortable and fulfilling.
Exactly. And I imagine a big part of that is equipping them with coping mechanisms for those everyday situations that can be really challenging for them.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. And that makes me think about, beyond therapy, are there things that families, educators, even friends can do to create a more sensory-friendly environment for the people in their lives? I mean, what are some practical takeaways here for our listeners?
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of it is about simple adjustments. Like for someone with tactile hyposensitivity, just having fidget toys available or textured objects, that can make a world of difference.
Oh, I bet.
For someone with auditory hyposensitivity, it can be as simple as trying to minimize background noise, using visual cues to support what you're saying,
Right.
or just being patient
Right.
when they ask you to repeat yourself,
Yeah.
because it might take a few tries for that message to really get through.
It sounds like more than anything, it's about awareness,
Yes.
and empathy, understanding that someone might be experiencing the world in a way that's fundamentally different from how we are and adjusting accordingly.
It is. It's about shifting that perspective from what's wrong with this person to what's going on for this person and how can I be supportive.
And that's a powerful question
It is.
to carry with us, I think, in all areas of life, not just when we're thinking about hyposensitivity. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, is there one thing you want our listeners to really take away from this conversation?
I think the big takeaway here is that hyposensitivity really challenges us to rethink our assumptions about what's normal when it comes to sensory experiences.
It does.
It highlights just how diverse the human experience truly is
Mhm.
and reminds us that within that diversity,
Yeah,
we find a whole spectrum of strengths and challenges.
absolutely. And that what might seem like a small difference in sensory processing can actually have a really profound impact on someone's life.
Exactly.
And it's up to us to approach those differences with curiosity and compassion rather than judgment.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been such an eye-opening conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to really break all of this down for us.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this.
And for our listeners, if you're eager to learn more, don't worry, we've got you covered.
Be sure to check out our show notes where we'll link to some fantastic resources. And until next time, as always, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and remember, the world is full of fascinating nuances just waiting to be discovered.